curious in terms of like how specific you can get, and you mentioned about gauging open rates. Can you target based on like, do you have access to information like based on who opens these emails the most? Can you get that specific?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's going to come down to the capacity of the organization of the campaign. You know, if you're running a local assembly, if you're in a local assembly race, you're probably not going to be staffed or using tools that have that level of sophistication, and you're not going to do that. But if you're running a national campaign or a state campaign, you're probably using tools that will allow you to do that. And if you prioritize that, if that's important to your goals, then you can get down to that level of sophistication. You can say, I want to send emails to people who care about the environment and who open and click through on the emails on a consistent basis, and draw that line and decide where you want to do that. So the tools are they're very powerful in that way. Well, I want to come back to a few things that you said just about how do you label those things? Sorry, this is where my thinking. So characteristics, yeah. So speed. So when you were talking about speed, you were talking about the speed of responding. There's other ways in which the web is enabling speed that are also fun and exciting. So one of those would be the speed of our ability to find people, to find specific people who we're interested in communicating with, whether it's delivering a specific message. And I'll come back and give examples of that. The speed with which we can figure out who's connected to whom, which can be very important in a political campaign when you're trying to figure out how to reach an influential, how to bring somebody into your coalition. If you're trying to if you're running a ballot campaign, often you're trying to build a coalition of sort of odd bedfellows to represent a broad coalition, and you're trying to get maybe the school board or local company or something. And so being able to find those connections, and then be able to see what people are talking about, what they're thinking about. All those things are now incredibly easy and quick to be able to find and look at online, which then enables you to even more precisely deliver specific messages if you're, again, depending on what you're staffed at, how you're staffed to communicate with people and to try to bring them into your cause. Give you an example of what this might look like. We now have, we've all heard of big data, right? Big data is where we talk about big data, and so there's all this data that's being generated by all the things that we're doing right now, tweeting and Facebook and buying things and whatever, and that's being crunched by very massive computers and super smart people. And the idea at the most generous level, right, is that people are going to build things that help us, that are going to provide us more things that will help us, that we'll be happy about, whether it's a map that makes it easier for us to find things we're looking for or whatever. So, but on the campaign side, on the political side, big data is being translated in a different way, which is basically the ability to track the online conversation in real time. And what that's enabling us to do is to find out, to identify who's influencing a particular conversation, who's driving the debate on one side of the issue, who's driving the debate on the other side of the issue. And I'll take an example, which is people remember the Planned Parenthood Susan B. Komen thing, right? The kerfuffle, or whatever the right kerfuffle. Thank you. That one. So in that case, Planned Parenthood, as an example, was able to identify during that campaign the 5 or 10 most influential people on their side of that dialogue. Not only were they able to isolate and identify the folks who were most influential on their side and who were most influential on the other side, but they were able to identify where those people were getting their content, because those two things weren't always the same. And by doing that, you're able to pull in close to you folks who are writing very influential content about your side of the issue or about your candidate in order to bring them close to you and hopefully have influence on them. That's just as an example. And talking about speed, just a few weeks after that took place, you'll remember that there was then the Catholic Church and the Obama administration's rule around birth control. And there was a pivotal moment. Anybody remember what the pivotal moment was was that just sort of transformed the dialogue around that issue. Anybody recall what it was? A photograph. Well, there was a hearing, and there was about 5 people that looked like Dan and me up there. This was
Actually, to be fair, even older and whiter.
Somebody took a picture.
If you can imagine such a thing.
And the reason I'm telling this story is because literally, you could chart, you could see in real time, online, the change, the shift that took place in the online conversation as that photograph got tweeted around the globe within, minutes, even, within minutes of the photograph being taken and visually leaving that room. And so, again, just talking about speed, and all this stuff can be very, very powerful. So, it brings us back to, the targeting question. So,
before you switch back, just one more point on speed, which I think is important, which I should have raised earlier, so I'm glad you brought the conversation back. I moved fairly quickly to reactive speed. But there's another reason that speed is important proactively. Let me ask you this. Let's say that the Kings win the Stanley Cup tonight. Which is going to be a better celebration? The one tonight at LA Live, or the one 3 weeks from tomorrow at LA Live? Which is a better party? Tonight. How come? It's relevant. It's media. Why else?
The fans are there.
Fans are there. You know what? It just happened. And if you think about it, your emotional reaction to anything is the most intense at the moment you find out about it. Emotion very rarely builds gradually. It's not like I'm going to wake up in July and say, they won! And think about it, when you find out about something, really good news, really bad news, a friend of yours is getting married, you find out that you or your spouse is expecting, one of your kids has a real breakthrough in the classroom. When are you most excited? The minute you find out, right? And gradually you keep happy feelings about it, but that emotional level is never as high as it was when you first find out. So I'll give you an example. My father, as I think several of you know, is a very, very ardent liberal Democrat. He's sort of a Trotskyite when it comes right down to it, I think I told you. But he tells me, I remember when I was in college, he was following the Democratic primary for president. The kerfluffle, if you will. I love this. And that year, this is 1984, Walter Mondale, the former vice president, the establishment candidate, was running against Gary Hart, who was the insurgent in that generation youth candidate. And my dad was very uninspired. My dad and my stepmom were very uninspired by Mondale. And Gary Hart pulled a big upset. He won the New Hampshire primary. And that was on a Tuesday night. The next morning, my dad read about the results in the morning paper. About a week after that, he got a piece of mail from the Hart campaign asking for money. About a week after that, he found his checkbook. About a week after that, he found a stamp. About a week after that, he remembered to drop the check in the mail. About a week after that, the check arrived at campaign headquarters. About a week after that, it cleared the bank. By that point, Gary Hart had been eliminated from the Democratic presidential primary, and Walter Mondale was the Democratic nominee for president, who went on to lose 49 states to Ronald Reagan in that election. Fast forward to 2008. My dad and my stepmom are watching the Iowa caucuses online. And they see Barack Obama's victory speech. And in 11 keystrokes, my dad had contributed to the Obama for President campaign. And of course, that not only was that money instantaneously available, but they captured him at that peak emotional moment. If you think about it, for all of you, whether it's Obama, whether it's Romney, whether it's Brian Johnson, whoever it is, they're certain emotional peaks. And the quicker the campaign can grab you and capture that emotional energy, the more emotional energy there's going to be for them to use on the campaign's behalf. That's why the speed is so important.
Do you feel like maybe campaigns will be less inspired to capture that energy in that moment? Because if you can instead find somebody who is slow and steady and super wealthy, then you wouldn't necessarily have to have moments like that to capture money. Or do you see that always being true, you're always going to try to capture that?
Well, let's assume that raising money from a super wealthy donor is more likely to take place in person than online anyway. It is relatively unlikely that Sheldon Adelson or George Soros is gonna respond to an email appeal with a $1 million PayPal thing. So this is more for a small donor or a volunteer, where the emotional impulse really is the critical decider. You're right, for a larger scale donor, they're gonna be much more considered. But that's not, tell me if you disagree, Larry, that's not as primary an audience here, is someone whose emotion is gonna spike up and down.
That's right. There are digital tools that are, I mean, they're not going to be used for George Soros, but that are being used for major donors and mega donors, which we can talk some about. But by and large, we're talking about large numbers of people that are getting smaller amounts.
Would PayPal process a $1 million super PAC donation? A couple people had their hands up.
Yeah, the example you used earlier with Planned Parenthood and Susan B. Anthony, you noted that they had identified 5 to 10 key influentials through the use of online platforms. Can you just put a little bit more color on that? Like, what did that look like? Who did they identify? How did they leverage that to change the conversation?
I'm a little limited in how much I can share, just candidly. But let's see. What can I say about that? I think the important thing here is that there are we have the ability now to track, again, to track in real time the conversation that's taking place and see whether or not it's shifting in one direction or the other. And so we can see whether or not the comments are trending, and it takes very sophisticated filtering tools. So we can see if things are trending in our direction or away from our direction, and we can also see who's impacting that, who's driving that, and that's across so it's blogs and Twitter and Facebook and anything that's public and social. And by identifying the most influential people, that's going to tell you one thing. That's going to tell you who's driving the up and down of the debate on both sides. But it doesn't tell you necessarily where those people are getting their content, and that's kind of the magical moment. I mean, I'll give you a commercial example. The same firm that works with my friends at Planned Parenthood work with a commercial company that makes tablets. And in that case, they had come out with several tablets, and the tablets had been essentially undermined within days, if not hours, of their surfacing in the stores, and they were trying to get a feel for why that was. So they used the same technology, the same approach to identify the people who were driving that conversation. In this case, the tablets into the dirt. They identified the 4 or 5 people who were very, very influential. Turns out that they write on a variety of topics, but they were getting their content from people who specialized in that particular area. And so it was those people, the content people, that they pulled in close and gave some upfront personal demos, that kind of thing.
And if you think about it, this is a reflection of the conversation we had last week about traditional news media, concentric circles. There are certain influencers who are at the center of every discussion, and when you identify those and able to monitor what they're saying, it's much more efficient and much more effective way of influencing the overall conversation than trying to influence the overall conversation.
Right, that's right.
Just a quick follow-up. Is that accessible then? I mean, noting earlier that you guys are talking about a very sophisticated operation and presumably a respectable price tag associated with it. Is that for a candidate? Yeah, how accessible is that type of functionality?
It's totally at a different level. So those tools are again, it's very sophisticated filtering tools, tracking tools that enable you to do that. But I'm involved in a campaign that's there's 500 delegates showing up to vote on a interdenominational issue for a church. And and so it's very small, and we're using tools to identify to stay on top of who's saying what and whether or not that matters, and the